Raised by the forest's gentle beasts. Chapter 1, The First Embrace. I don't remember the moment I first opened my eyes. They say memory is made from stories we tell ourselves, but my stories were whispered by fur and feathers, not words. My first cradle was a circle of moss and soft ferns, tucked between roots older than any village, beneath a canopy that turned sunlight into shifting green lace. I must have been so small then, smaller than the paws that carried me deeper into the underbrush when thunder cracked across the hills. I have no mother in the shape that people speak of, no lullabies sung by human voices, no warm milk from familiar hands. Instead, there was Mara, the wolf with fur like dusk and eyes that glowed with kindness instead of hunger. She found me one dawn when the mist still kissed the ground. Her muzzle nudged at the blanket I'd been wrapped in, though it was no blanket, just an old coat abandoned by the wind. She sniffed me, circled me, and then, after what must have been a deep, wordless thought, she picked me up by my collar as she would a cub, and carried me to her den. In that den, I met my first brothers and sisters. Their breath warmed my cheeks as they pressed close, little bodies trembling in the twilight of the burrow. I did not know their language, but I understood their rhythm, the heartbeat of fur against fur, the way they whimpered for warmth and found it in one another. Days passed without me counting them. Nights arrived without fear, because Mara's presence filled every hollow space with the certainty that no harm would reach us. Sometimes, when rain fell too hard, Mara would press her side against me, so I would know I was never alone. The den smelled of damp earth and wildflowers that grew where the sun broke through the canopy. As I grew, I learned how to crawl alongside my littermates. I learned the game of nuzzling noses and batting soft ears. I learned the gentle reprimand of a mother wolf's low growl, and the even softer forgiveness of her tongue brushing my cheek when I made amends. These were my first lessons, how to belong to a family without needing words. One evening, when the moon sat full above the trees, I peeked outside the den for the first time. My hands sank into the forest floor, alive with fallen needles and tiny crawling things that fled from my touch. The air tasted of secrets, sweet, mossy, and a little cold. A branch cracked under my weight and I startled, looking back at Mara who watched from the mouth of the den. She didn't stop me. She only lifted her head to the moon and let out a low, humming sound, not a howl, but a breath that told me she saw me and trusted me to find my way back. Encouraged, I crawled further, reaching a small clearing where the moon poured itself onto the earth like silver water. In that pool of moonlight, a shape stirred. At first I thought it was a rock, but then it blinked. A pair of eyes reflected the moonlight, wide, curious, unafraid. A small owl, perched on a stump, watching me watch it. We stayed like that, two creatures with different hearts but the same wonder. When it flapped its wings, it did so without hurry, drifting away on a breeze that smelled of pine. I returned to the den just as dawn painted the sky. My limbs were tired but my mind felt awake in a new way. Mara sniffed me once, as if to count my scent against the world I had stepped into. Then she nudged me back to my brothers and sisters, where warmth awaited. Years later, I would understand this moment as a beginning. But back then, it was simply the night I learned the forest would hold me, the way Mara did, with quiet watchfulness, with the kind of love that never asks for anything back except trust. And so, nestled among fur and breath, I drifted into the gentle hush of the den. Above us, the forest whispered stories that only those who listen with more than ears could hear. Chapter 2, The Soft Lessons. When my legs grew steady enough to carry me beyond the mouth of the den, Mara let me wander under her calm gaze. The world outside was vast, but it was gentle with me, as if every leaf and root knew I was not made for harm or haste. I remember my first steps into the sunlit clearing. The light there was soft and dappled, falling through layers of green. It made the fur of my wolf siblings shimmer like tiny rivers flowing through shadows. They ran circles around me, tumbling and nipping at each other's ears, urging me to join in their dance. At first, my steps were clumsy. My hands pressed against the earth as much as my feet did. But the ground forgave me, the moss springing back where I fell, the low branches bending rather than snapping when I stumbled through. In those early days, the forest felt alive in a way that asked me to trust it completely. Mara would watch from a distance, her eyes half closed but her ears always turning toward my smallest sound. She taught me not with words, but with the patience of presence. When I watched her hunt, I learned silence. When I watched her rest, I learned stillness. One morning, when the mist had not yet lifted from the hollows, I found myself face to face with a creature I had never seen before. It was large, brown, and moved with a calm that made the earth seem smaller beneath its paws. A bear, older than any story I would one day hear from humans. The bear's eyes met mine. It did not roar or charge, instead, it sat down on its haunches and breathed, a sound like wind rolling through stones. I sat too, folding my legs beneath me the way I had seen Mara do when waiting for dusk. We studied each other, the bear and I, until a branch cracked behind me and a small fox slipped into the clearing. The fox was Quicksilver, always moving, always glancing back at me with eyes that glittered with mischief. She darted close enough to sniff my foot, then vanished into a cluster of ferns only to reappear behind the bear, tail flicking like a question mark. I laughed, a small sound, but enough to echo in the quiet of the woods. The bear's ears twitched at the sound. The fox froze, then pounced toward me, playful and unafraid. In that moment, I knew, the forest was teaching me not just to survive, but to belong. Days turned into weeks. The seasons shifted their edges gently around us. Rain came and went, draping the world in a silver veil. Sunlight painted new patterns on the den walls each dawn. I learned which roots gave water when the creek ran low. I learned which berries stained my fingers blue and which ones Mara nudged away with a warning huff. Sometimes, I would follow Mara through the undergrowth. Her stride was patient, never hurried. We would pause beside streams where deer stepped carefully into the shallows. I watched their legs move like reeds in water, so silent, so sure. One deer, a doe with a single white stripe down her neck, would often lift her head to look at me as if she knew something about me that I did not yet know about myself. Nights were my favorite. When the sky bloomed with stars, Mara would rest near the den's entrance while I lay belly up in the clearing, counting the tiny fires above. My wolf siblings curled around me, warm and breathing dreams I could almost hear, soft whimpers, paws twitching at invisible prey that never needed catching. Sometimes, I thought I could hear the forest itself breathing. The wind hummed through branches in words I could almost understand. The rustle of leaves was like a lullaby, though I did not know the meaning of lullabies then. In the darkest hours, when the moon was nothing but a memory behind drifting clouds, Mara would come closer. She would press her nose against my chest, listening to the steady thrum of my heart. I would bury my face in her neck, my fingers threading through the thick ruff of fur that smelled of pine and wildflowers and something older than both. In these moments, I learned the greatest lesson of all, that love does not need language. It only needs time and touch, trust and presence. I needed no cradle but the forest floor. I needed no cradle song but the heartbeat of beasts who had chosen me as their own. When dawn crept back, so did my wonder. Each day, my legs carried me farther. Each day, the forest revealed another piece of its endless kindness. And always, when I returned to the den, Mara was there, waiting, her eyes soft with the same promise she gave me that first dawn, that here, in this wild place, I would always be part of something gentle, something alive. So I slept each night wrapped in fur and dreams, as the world outside drifted ever deeper into hush. Chapter 3: The Path of Pause. By the time the leaves turned gold and the nights came sooner than they used to, my feet had found paths that even Mara did not always follow. I was growing taller, my steps more sure. I could hear the small stories the forest told in rustling grass and snapping twigs, a hidden language I had learned to trust without ever trying to speak it aloud. It was on one such crisp morning, when the frost had only just begun to kiss the edges of ferns, that I first found the path of pause. I had woken before my wolf siblings, the warmth of their fur still clinging to my skin as I slipped out of the den. Mara lifted her head when she heard me stir, her eyes steady and calm. She did not stop me. She rarely did anymore. Maybe she knew the forest would guard me as fiercely as she did. Stepping into the clearing, I noticed small impressions in the soft earth. Paw prints, too small for wolves, too round for foxes. They curved around the roots of an old oak and disappeared into a tunnel of low branches and bramble. I bent down, touching the print with my fingers. The soil was cool and damp. Fresh. I followed them without hesitation. Each print led me deeper, away from the familiar clearings and dens, into a part of the forest I did not yet know. Here, the trees grew closer together. Sunlight broke through in thin streams, catching on drifting motes that made the air feel alive. The path twisted and dipped, sometimes lost under fallen leaves only to appear again by a mossy log or a patch of mushrooms clustered like tiny umbrellas. I soon realized I was not alone. A rustle in the undergrowth made me freeze. I crouched low, as Mara had taught me. From beneath a tangle of ferns, a pair of bright eyes blinked back at me, dark, wide, and shimmering with curiosity. Then, slowly, a tiny nose twitched into the light, followed by a round, bristled shape. A hedgehog. Then another, smaller one right behind it. They watched me as I watched them, our breath mingling in the cold morning air. One took a step forward, its little paws pressing new prints into the mud. I mirrored it, moving slowly so as not to startle them. For a moment, we were two wanderers on the same path, creatures with different skins but the same wonder humming in our chests. The hedgehogs shuffled away under a low root, vanishing as quietly as they had appeared. I smiled, standing again to follow where their trail might lead. The path soon widened into a clearing I had never seen before, a hidden meadow surrounded by tall birches whose white bark glowed like lanterns in the dim morning light. In the center of the meadow was a pool. Not a pond, but a shallow mirror of water that reflected the branches overhead and the drift of clouds beyond them. I stepped closer, peering into it. My own reflection looked back at me, a child wrapped in scraps of fur and leaves, hair tangled with twigs, eyes bright with something older than the few years I carried on my shoulders. I knelt at the water's edge, dipping my fingers into the cold. Ripples broke the image into pieces, scattering my face across the sky above. I did not mind. Here, alone yet held by everything around me, I felt no need to gather those pieces back together. A soft flutter broke the stillness. I looked up to see a bird perched on a branch just above me, a jay with feathers so blue they seemed to steal color from the sky. It tilted its head, watching me with an intelligence I could feel more than see. Then, with a single hop, it dropped to the ground, pecked at the earth near my knee, and lifted off again, vanishing into the canopy. I wondered if it had come to show me this place. If the prince, the hedgehogs, the pool, if all of it was the forest's way of telling me I was ready for more. By the time I made my way back to the den, the sun had risen high enough to warm my shoulders. Mara stood waiting near the entrance. She sniffed the air when I approached, reading the story of my morning from the scent of damp earth, crushed grass, and a trace of wild water. She did not scold. Instead, she pressed her head gently against mine, a greeting and a blessing all at once. That night, curled once again among the warmth of my wolf siblings, I dreamed of paths I had not yet walked. I dreamed of paw prints leading me deeper and deeper into the green, where every creature watched with eyes that held no fear, only a quiet promise, that I belonged, here and always. And though my human tongue could not name this promise, my heart understood it perfectly. In this forest, my steps would always find soft ground. My breath would always find gentle air. And my soul, though I did not yet know how to name such a thing, would always find its way home. Chapter 4: The Meadow's Secret. I could not keep away from the hidden meadow. Once I knew it existed, my feet seemed to remember the path on their own, even when the prince that first guided me had long faded with the rain. Each morning, when my wolf family still curled around each other in the den's hush, I would slip away like a whisper between branches and let the forest lead me back to that quiet circle of grass and water. It was never the same twice. Sometimes I would find the pool rimmed with fallen petals, pale and soft like drifting thoughts. Sometimes a new log would lie across my path, blanketed with tiny fungi that glowed faintly in the dawn light. I began to think the forest liked to play with me, moving its pieces when I wasn't looking, inviting me to notice small wonders. One morning, mist hugged the ground so thick I could barely see my hands in front of me. Yet my feet knew where to step, over a root, around a bramble, between twin birch trunks that stood like open gates. When the mist lifted, I found the meadow waiting as if it had been holding its breath just for me. In the center, where the pool mirrored the pale sky, something stirred among the reeds. I crouched low, moving slowly so as not to break whatever spell the meadow wove around its secrets. There, resting half-hidden in the tall grass, was a deer. Not the doe I had seen at the stream, but a young stag, antlers just beginning to branch like delicate fingers reaching for the sky. He watched me with eyes that seemed older than the seasons, calm and unbothered by my presence. A thin veil of mist clung to his fur, beads of water catching the light in tiny sparkles. We stared at each other for what felt like an entire morning, though the sun had barely moved when he finally rose, unhurried, and stepped softly into the trees beyond. His place in the grass stayed warm for a while after he left. I pressed my palm there, feeling the last of his presence fade into the earth. Somehow, it felt like a promise, though I did not yet know what was being promised, only that it was kind. Days blurred together in the meadow. I watched dragonflies dart across the pool, their wings flickering like living jewels. I found mushrooms that grew in perfect rings, tiny kingdoms where ants carried stories back and forth. I lay on my back in the grass and let the clouds drift above me, turning into shapes that meant nothing but made me smile. Sometimes, a gentle rain would find me there. It would fall through the branches in soft sighs, kissing my skin and soaking my hair until I laughed, a sound that startled a family of sparrows from the bramble. I did not run from the rain. Instead, I would stand with my arms open, feeling it wash through me like an old song I did not need to understand. One afternoon, the sky darkened earlier than usual. Thunder rumbled far away but never came close enough to frighten me. I stayed in the meadow, sitting by the pool, tracing circles in the water with a stick. As the first drops fell, I saw my reflection break apart, reform, break again, 1,000 selves scattered into ripples that reached for the reeds. Behind me, I heard soft steps. I turned, half expecting Mara, but found a fox instead, perhaps the same one from my first adventure. She sat at the edge of the clearing, her fur darkened by the drizzle, eyes bright and unblinking. For a moment, I wondered if she would run. But she did not. Instead, she trotted over to me, circled once, and lay down beside me as if we had always shared this place. We sat together under the gentle rain, listening to the world hush itself around us. The trees murmured secrets I could almost catch, if only I listened hard enough. The fox's fur brushed against my hand, warm and soft, grounding me in that small, perfect moment. When the rain slowed, the meadow smelled new, green and clean, alive with the promise of tomorrow's blossoms. I stood, the fox rising with me, her tail brushing my ankle like a fleeting thought. She watched as I stepped back toward the path, then vanished into the reeds with a flick of her ears. When I returned to the den, Mara was waiting. She sniffed my hair, damp and tangled, and nudged my forehead with her nose, a silent question answered only by the smile I gave her in return. She did not need to know every detail. She knew enough just by the scent of rain and meadow clinging to my skin. That night, curled once more among fur and steady breaths, I dreamed of the meadow, but this time, it was endless. A sea of grass and flowers that opened wider with every step I took, revealing creatures I had not yet met, rabbits in cloaks of ivy, owls with feathers like dusk, a bear who spoke without words but made me understand every hidden truth of the woods. I knew, even as I drifted deeper into the hush, that the forest was not just a home but a teacher, one that asked for nothing except my trust and my wonder. And so, in the hush of that dream, I promised silently that I would keep listening. That I would keep walking the path of paws and feathers and leaves, wherever it chose to lead me. Chapter 5: The Circle of Night. When the days grew shorter and the air carried the hush of turning seasons, I found myself drawn to the meadow not just in the soft bloom of morning but in the deeper hours when the sun had long given its warmth to the stars. The path that once felt like a secret trail was now so familiar my feet could find it even in darkness, guided only by the songs of crickets and the occasional hoot of an owl watching from the canopy. One night, when the moon rose like a quiet guardian behind drifting clouds, I slipped from the warmth of the den while my wolf siblings dreamed in a circle of fur. Mara opened one golden eye as I moved past her. She did not rise, but her tail brushed the earth twice, a gentle farewell and a promise that I would be welcome when I returned. The forest at night was a softer thing than in daylight. Shadows did not frighten me, instead, they moved like friends, shifting to make way as I passed. The cold that clung to my skin felt less like an intrusion and more like an invitation to notice how alive I was, how my breath rose in small clouds, carrying a piece of me into the sky with every exhale. When I reached the meadow, it was waiting, unchanged yet utterly new. The pool reflected the stars above so perfectly that it seemed as if a piece of the sky had been lowered to the earth just for me. I knelt at its edge, touching the surface with the tip of my finger. Ripples spread out, breaking the constellations into trembling fragments that slowly settled again into quiet order. I lay back in the grass, arms folded behind my head, eyes open to the endless scatter of stars. They seemed to hum, a song too old and deep for words but gentle enough for my bones to understand. In that hush, I felt smaller than I ever had, and yet, somehow, more a part of everything than ever before. The night creatures came as they always did. A fox first, her eyes twin lanterns catching the starlight. She sat near my feet, ears flicking at the smallest sounds in the dark. A pair of owls drifted down without a sound, wings open like pieces of the night itself, settling on a branch just above me. They blinked in unison, heads turning slowly as if to weigh my presence against the hush they carried. I heard the soft steps of deer moving at the edge of the clearing. I did not need to see them to know they were there. Their quiet presence pressed against the air like a blanket, warm, watchful, forgiving. As I lay there, the world seemed to breathe around me, every blade of grass rising and falling with a rhythm older than my heartbeat. I closed my eyes, listening to the circle of sounds, the rustle of fur against earth, the hush of feathers settling, the sigh of wind through branches that cradled the sky. I wondered then if the forest dreamed when I did. If the trees carried memories in their rings the way I carried my lessons in my bones. If the creatures who kept me company at night whispered to each other stories of the human child who walked barefoot among them, who spoke no words but heard every one. At some point, I must have drifted into a place where thought and dream tangled so gently that I did not notice when the world of stars slipped behind my eyelids. In that place, I saw myself not as I was but as I might have been, a small shadow curled in the hollow of a tree, fur and feather woven into my skin, my voice a hush no louder than the wind through leaves. When I woke, dawn was only a thought brushing the edge of the sky. The owls had gone, but a single feather lay near my shoulder, pale and perfect, as if left behind on purpose. The fox still sat nearby, eyes closed, breathing slow as the world lightened around us. I sat up, careful not to disturb the hush we had built together in the dark. I pressed the feather against my palm, feeling its softness, its weightless truth. I did not know what it meant, but I knew I would carry it back with me, a small piece of the night folded into my waking. On my way back through the trees, the forest seemed to move with me, each branch dipping low as if to greet me, each root steady under my bare feet. When I stepped into the clearing where the den waited, Mara rose to meet me. She sniffed the feather, then my hair, then pressed her muzzle to my chest in a way that said, "You are still ours." I nestled back among my siblings, the feather tucked safely near my heart. Outside, the world woke slow and soft, as if the hush of the night lingered, reminding me that some secrets are not meant to be solved but simply carried, like a song that hums just below hearing, waiting for the next circle of night. Chapter 6: The Gentle Return. As the seasons turned once more and the air grew softer with the promise of new blossoms, I found myself noticing how my steps had changed. They were longer now, quieter too, the forest floor no longer startled beneath my feet but welcomed them like an old friend. The moss seemed to remember my weight, the roots lifted just enough to guide my path rather than catch my toes. I had grown, though no mirror told me so. I knew it by the way Mara watched me, her eyes, once full of questions, now rested on me with the calm of answers found. My wolf siblings, now strong and swift, ran ahead of me through the underbrush, only to circle back, brushing against my sides as if to remind me that I would never be alone. The meadow that once felt hidden now felt like a second heart beating gently beneath the canopy. Each visit showed me something new, a ring of mushrooms that glowed faintly under a new moon, a pair of swans that drifted across the pool's glassy surface at dawn, the quiet hush of ferns opening like soft green secrets to the sun. I learned to sit for hours without moving, letting the forest's hush wrap around my shoulders like a blanket. Birds landed near my knees, feathers flicking the air as they preened and sang tiny songs meant only for themselves. Once, the young stag I had seen seasons ago returned, antlers now proud, branches crowned with velvet. He stepped close enough that I could hear the slow sigh of his breath, feel the warmth of it against my fingertips as he sniffed the air around me. Then he slipped away again, but not without leaving behind the deep hush of trust that lingered long after he vanished into the trees. Sometimes, when the nights were clear and the stars poured themselves into the pool, I would find my reflection there, older, yes, but still wrapped in the quiet promise the forest gave me when I was too small to understand. I saw my hair tangled with leaves, my hands dirt-smudged and open to the earth. And I would smile, because each line on my palm felt written by paws, feathers, whiskers, and the hush of wind carrying old songs through the canopy. One night, as I lay beneath the circle of birch trees that guarded the meadow, Mara came to me. She moved slower now, her fur streaked with strands of silver moonlight that glowed when she stepped into the clearing. She lay beside me, pressing her side against mine, her breath warm against my cheek. I curled my fingers in the thick ruff at her neck, feeling the steady thrum of her life, the same heartbeat that once lulled me to rest when I was no more than a bundle of borrowed cloth. In that hush, I knew something without needing to say it aloud. The forest had raised me, but it had also taught me how to belong, not by holding tight but by letting go, by weaving me into its hush so gently that I could never truly leave, no matter how far my steps might one day wander. When dawn brushed its soft light over the clearing, Mara lifted her head. She sniffed the breeze, then nudged my shoulder, a quiet invitation to rise. Together we walked back to the den, though I knew the path well enough now to find it with my eyes closed. The den was smaller than I remembered, or perhaps I had simply grown to fit more of the forest inside me. My siblings waited, heads lifting as we returned. They pressed against my legs, their fur catching the dawn's warmth. I curled among them, Mara's breath steady behind me. Outside, the hush of the forest drifted through the roots and branches, carrying with it the gentle promise that everything circles back to where it began. I do not know how many seasons will pass before my legs grow tired, before my eyes close one final time beneath these watchful trees. But I do know this, when that moment comes, it will not feel like an end. It will feel like stepping back into the hush that first cradled me when I was small and the world was new. And so, I rest here now, one heartbeat among many, one quiet story whispered by fur and feather and leaf. No words needed, no promises spoken. Only the hush that grows deeper with each breath I take, wrapping around me like a soft cloak spun from moss and starlight. If you listen closely, you might hear it too, the gentle lull of a forest that keeps all its children close, even when they wander, even when they dream far beyond its roots. A circle unbroken, a return so soft that it feels like home.